Hi, my name is Cardenas Flores, and in this video I will be presenting a forgotten historical figure named Percy Lavon Julian. Percy Lavon Julian was born on April 11, 1899 in Montgomery, Alabama. He died on April 19, 1975. Julian was a Christian. He was an African American and is recognized as a pioneer in the chemical synthesis of medical drugs such as cortisone, steroids, and birth control. So some background information about this historical era for African American is that although African Americans had rights, they still faced racism, prejudice, and discrimination, such as the Jim Crow law. The Jim Crow law was like not supposed to continue, but it did after the Jim Crow law was a system of laws, customs that enforced racial segregation and discrimination throughout the United States, especially in the South, from the late 19th century through the 1960s. The law did not specifically mention race, but were written and applied in a way that discriminated against African Americans. So technically, you don't have a paper saying like, oh, you must segregate, oh, you must like, enforce discrimination, racism. It was just like a cultural custom where they separated the whites and other cultures such as African Americans. Um, and you could see this everywhere. It's like, oh, um, in the restrooms, they had white restrooms and colored restrooms. In the restaurants, it's only for whites or only for colored. In the buses, we have whites in the front and colored seated at the rear. Um, so the big concept was like they were separate, but they weren't equal. They were fighting for equal rights, and they didn't have it. And it was a very difficult time to be living in this era because you're facing discrimination, you're facing racism, prejudice, violence, death threats. There was so much going on for African Americans. So back to Julian, it was he was in Montgomery, Alabama. So he was able to get public education to the point of 8th grade. By 8th grade, they weren't able to give him more education, so high school education. But eventually, a few years later, he applied to DePaul University in Greencastle, Indiana, and there he was able to take high school level classes in the evening to get up to the academic level of his peers. So he had to do the academic level of high school and do college courses, and he had a lot of education and struggles going on, especially um, since that university was a white community, and he had to face a lot of racism and discrimination, such as like not being able to live in the dorms at the school, or people in that community refusing to give him, meals he paid for. Um, but eventually, once he was able to complete his education there as masters, and he was able to be actually the first in his school valedictorian, um, which was actually an amazing accomplishment. Eventually, he wanted to continue pursuing his education in chemistry, but they refused to continue his education. Um, Later, a couple years later, by 1931, Percy attended the University of Vienna in Austria, where he completed his PhD. So some works he's famous for, or he's like recognized for, is that in 1935 with Joseph Picot, his he first synthesized from this plant a chemical called pisotygmine or isarine, which could treat the sometimes blinding disease of glaucoma by reducing the pressure inside the eyeball. This brought him international scientific acclaim, but no profession. So technically, he was making a soybean plant treatment or medicine that treated glaucoma, which technically is like blood pressure, or this technically air pressure from your eye, which sometimes can lead to blinding. And he was able to create a treatment for it. But before that, during the research of the treatment for glaucoma, Julian was in Harvard University doing this research, and eventually he was forced to quit because he was actually having an affair with his laboratory partner, and she was married, and there was like this complicated, controversial, and he was forced to quit. And after a couple months or a year after he left, they completed his research, and he was actually reviewing the research, and he found a mistake, and he contacted a professor, and he was able to achieve a chemical breakthrough because he was actually correct. Like, there was a mistake, and the treatment for glaucoma that he did was actually like achieved. It was perfect. It didn't. So that's some of his work during his time. Some struggles he had to take on were that after he found treatment for glaucoma, and he started to do more research on other medical treatments and to increase in chemistry, Julian still had people shut doors on his face, which is hard. It's like he turned in a resume for a job application, and everyone, like the person reading it, was like, "Oh, great, like a great candidate, like I'll totally hire you." Until the face-to-face interview came, and he was like, "Oh, you're black, like, oh, you're not fit for this position." And a lot of people couldn't look beyond the color of his skin. Um, Not only did he struggle like in his education and his career, but in his personal life too. On November 22, 1950, people who were against Julian and his family living in a white community started a fire, damaging only a portion of his house. So people like, this was only, I believe, a couple months after he moved into this white community, and people did not like it. He received death threats. He even, again, violence occurred in June 12, 1951. Julian's house was hit with dynamite, and he was faced with a lot of death threats, discrimination, prejudice in this community, in every single aspect of his life. Family his family life, like his family was impacted because they were receiving death threats and violence was thrown against them, um, in his career, in his education, in the community. So he received a lot of discrimination, but yet he was able to like face that discrimination, and it's like, no, I'm still gonna go, I'm still gonna fight, I'm still gonna stay. And that's some of the legacy he gave. Um, so another, like after I believe he died, Julian, or before he died, Julian was elected in 1973 to the National Academy of Science in recognition for his contribution in the field of chemistry. He was the second African American scientist to be inducted in this prestigious association. And then again in 1999, and he wasn't alive at this time anymore, the African American Society recognized Julian's synthesis of pisotygmine as a National Historic Chemical Landmark. So overall, he was a very interesting figure. His biography is so impactful. Like facing discrimination, facing so much, and yet he was like, no, I'm gonna keep going, I'm gonna keep fighting, I'm gonna get an education, I'm gonna face racism and discrimination, and I'm gonna continue applying for jobs, I'm gonna continue like protecting my family, living a good life and a successful life, even against like a whole community saying, "Oh no, you can't do this. You can't get your PhD here. You can't, live here. You can't work here." He was like, "No, I'm gonna continue, and I'm gonna continue my research and my work." And he eventually became what I believe is a legacy, like especially in the chemistry and medical field. You see like how he impacted it. Like even if we don't see it, we use medicine, especially like for girls, we use the birth control pill, and he was the first to start building some basic research on it. So with his research, we were able to develop the birth control pill, which was actually an amazing discovery if you ask a lot of women out there. Um, but overall, his research and findings is such an amazing. He should be added to the history, but he's like long forgotten. He's like no one. When I was doing my research on trying to find a figure, I was like, wow, he did this, and I don't even know. Like I might use like we use medicine when we're sick, and he probably laid the foundation to it all. He started like opportunities that African Americans didn't have. He made so much effect, yet we don't know about him. And I feel like he should be um like taught in our history class, like and should be in our history because he's such an important figure, yet we don't talk about him because it wasn't like Martin Luther King, I Have a Dream speech, or it wasn't like a violence or such an impactful civil rights movement, but he was a civil rights leader. So overall, I really like he really is an impactful figure, and he should be added to like our knowledge of who civil rights movement leaders. Um, so these are my um, references to my images, and so that's the end of my presentation. I hope you enjoyed or at least learned a little bit about who Percy, Lavon, Julian was, and